May 27th, 2026. This is our way of handling the day's Democracy Now! Stories. We go beyond the headline. We hold on to the facts that actually carry the weight of the story, then pull out the deeper lesson about power, institutions, and daily life. Story 1. President Trump attacked U.S. media outlets as Iranian officials signaled that ceasefire negotiations are still moving. Iran's parliamentary speaker returned from Qatar after talks that Iranian officials said included the possible release of $24 billion in frozen Iranian funds. The deeper lesson is that wartime messaging and financial pressure move together. Negotiations are not only about missiles and ceasefires, they are also about frozen money, public narrative, and who gets to claim victory. Story 2. Iran partially restored internet access after a nationwide blackout that lasted nearly 3 months. The core fact is simple: an entire country's connection to the outside world was restricted during war and negotiation. The deeper lesson is that information access is now part of state power. Control the internet, and you control organizing, evidence, fear, rumor, and the speed at which ordinary people can explain their own reality. Story 3. Israel said it killed Hamas's newly appointed armed wing chief in Gaza on Tuesday. A family statement said he was killed with his wife and son, while Gaza health officials said 6 people were killed and more than 20 wounded in the strike, which destroyed part of an apartment building in Gaza City. The deeper lesson is that targeted killing still lands inside civilian architecture. The official target may be one person, but the blast moves through families, floors, neighbors, and the ordinary space of a city. Story 4. A Gaza City resident said there is no ceasefire for people on the ground, describing constant shelling during Eid. Since last October's U.S. brokered ceasefire, the transcript says Israel has killed around 900 Palestinians in Gaza. The deeper lesson is that a ceasefire measured from a podium can be false at street level. The live test is whether people can sleep, gather, celebrate, bury the dead, and move without fear. Story 5. Israeli strikes in southern Lebanon killed at least 31 people and wounded 40 on Tuesday, according to Lebanon's health ministry. Israel launched more than 120 airstrikes in one day, and an Israeli military official confirmed troops had begun operating beyond the so-called Yellow Line, roughly 10 kilometers inside Lebanon. The deeper lesson is that boundaries are only real when enforced. Once military operations cross the line, the map becomes a suggestion, and civilians become the proof of what has actually changed. The U.S. carried out another strike Tuesday on a vessel in the Eastern Pacific, killing 1 person and leaving 2 survivors. The Trump administration again claimed the vessel was carrying drugs without providing evidence, and the Pentagon says nearly 200 people have been killed in boat strikes since September. The deeper lesson is that war logic can be imported into policing. Once the state treats suspicion as enough for lethal force, the ocean becomes a courtroom with no judge, no defense, and no appeal. Story 7. Hundreds of immigrants detained at Delaney Hall in Newark continue to hunger and labor strike over inhumane conditions and demands for release. Delaney Hall is operated by GEO Group, and ICE agents clashed with protesters outside, pepper spraying them during a day-long standoff. The deeper lesson is that detention creates pressure inside and outside the walls. The people inside use the only leverage left to them, their bodies, while the people outside fight for visibility against a system built to keep suffering contained. Story 8. Federal officials denied an ongoing hunger strike at Delaney Hall, while border official Tom Homan vowed to force-feed immigrants if the situation gets bad enough. Homeland Security also threatened consequences for Newark and other sanctuary cities, including disruptions to international flights and traveler processing. The deeper lesson is that sanctuary fights are becoming infrastructure fights. Immigration power is being pushed into airports, city budgets, public order, and the ability of local governments to function without federal retaliation. Story 9. The Trump administration is expanding mass immigration hearings, with more than 100 immigrants scheduled at a time for master calendar hearings. NPR reported that immigrants without legal representation are being disproportionately targeted, including in cities like Chicago and Boston. The deeper lesson is that speed can defeat due process without openly abolishing it. Put enough people in one room, move the docket fast enough, and the legal right to be heard becomes a ritual instead of protection. Story 10. The Supreme Court sided with the Trump administration by blocking a free speech lawsuit from federal immigration judges. The lawsuit challenged a rule limiting judges' ability to speak publicly on policy, and the National Association of Immigration Judges warned that justice cannot endure when judges are intimidated into silence. The deeper lesson is that courts depend on the independence of the people inside them. When immigration judges are treated like controlled employees instead of public guardians of process, the courtroom bends toward executive power. Story 11. Mass protests in Bolivia continued for nearly a month as farmers, teachers, and others demanded the resignation of President Rodrigo Paz and called for relief from austerity and soaring living costs. Lawmakers moved toward possible deployment of armed forces to suppress the mobilizations. The deeper lesson is that austerity becomes political instability when food prices reach the family table. People may debate ideology for a while, but the price of food, fuel, and survival decides how long a government keeps consent. Story 12. The Trump administration is reportedly preparing to send U.S. public health officials to Kenya to help staff a possible quarantine center for U.S. citizens exposed to Ebola. The World Health Organization says the outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo has reached more than 900 suspected cases and over 200 suspected deaths in under 2 weeks. The deeper lesson is that disease does not stay inside national borders or health ministries. It becomes logistics, quarantine capacity, trust, labor risk, and geopolitical planning. Story 13. Health workers in eastern Congo buried a doctor who died while treating Ebola patients. The president of the Ituri Medical Association said doctors are afraid but cannot abandon the sick because they have taken an oath. The deeper lesson is that public health systems ultimately rest on human courage. Protocols matter, equipment matters, and funding matters, but when fear rises, the system depends on whether trained people still walk toward the sick. Story 14. The Trump administration is pushing a new, non-disclosure agreement for all federal workers. The draft would bar disclosure of broad categories of non-public, confidential, proprietary, or sensitive internal material, going beyond standard classified and unclassified information. The deeper lesson is that secrecy can expand without using the word censorship. If workers cannot safely reveal how agencies function, the public loses the raw material needed to judge power. Story 15. A federal court blocked Alabama from using its new congressional map in the 2026 midterms, ruling that it intentionally discriminates against black voters. The panel wrote that Alabamians should not be forced to vote under a plan tainted by intentional race-based discrimination. The deeper lesson is that representation is infrastructure. District lines decide whose problems become visible, whose numbers become power, and whose votes are diluted before the election begins. Story 16. South Carolina's state Senate ended its session without voting on a map that would have dismantled the state's only majority black congressional district. Lawmakers quietly resisted pressure from Trump and national Republicans to join the redistricting fight before the midterms. The deeper lesson is that political pressure does not always move through speeches. Sometimes the meaningful act is delay, refusal, or letting a bad plan die without a dramatic confrontation. Story 17. In Texas, Attorney General Ken Paxton defeated four-term incumbent Senator John Cornyn in the Republican Senate primary runoff. Paxton had previously been indicted on felony securities fraud charges and impeached over allegations including bribery, obstruction, dereliction of duty, and abuse of public trust. The race reportedly cost nearly $130 million, making it the most expensive Senate primary in U.S. history. The deeper lesson is that party power is being reorganized around loyalty, combat, and donor scale more than institutional seniority. Incumbency still matters, but it no longer protects a politician from a movement willing to spend enough money to replace him. The through line today is simple. Power is being exercised through systems that look procedural until they touch ordinary life. Ceasefires exist on paper while bombs keep falling. Immigration courts move faster than representation can follow. Detention centers turn bodies into leverage. Voting maps decide power before ballots are cast. Public workers face broader secrecy rules. Disease, war, and politics all reveal the same structure. Control is moving through infrastructure, paperwork, borders, data, maps, and timing.